Wendy, thank you so much for joining us this morning, because I think it's so much better to hear directly from you on your response and Acta's response to TICO's fee structure. I know you have some pretty solid views on the matter, so I'll hand the floor over to you.
All right. So as you know, we've been advocating to the Ontario government, to TICO, to reduce financial burden and unnecessary or excessive red tape to operate a travel business in the province of Ontario. And so a lot of meetings have taken place with the government and with TICO, just about that the Travel Industry Act was created in a time before the internet, before consumers use credit cards. And so we do believe there needed to be a full review of TICO before any fees new fees are introduced.
It's interesting that you say that, because I speak to old timers like myself who talk about TICO the way it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and the conversations that took place even at that time about rehauling the act. And now we're facing the same thing all over again, even though there have been all of these meetings with the Government Advisory Board, which that's the part I don't understand. Where is the government in all of this? It's almost like they're not listening to you, and the sort of what I feel is a logical argument that you have to make versus listening to TICO. And perhaps it's a question of survival of an association or a registrar, or however we call it, rather than what's best for the industry. And I know that's maybe a harsh statement, but it's as an outsider, it appears that way.
Yeah, I think that what I think the good news is, and that we're hopeful that there has been an extensive review of TICO by the Auditor General, and actually there was a lot of findings where they've come out and said we need to look at this from top to bottom. That is the recommendation. That they acknowledge, the Auditor General, that a lot has changed, and that perhaps all of the items that TICO does are not relevant in 2023. So we're very happy about that. And we do feel that with all of the meetings that we had with the Auditor General and with the Ontario government, that that they have acknowledged that there is an issue and there needs to be a look. We are disappointed that TICO is moving forward with fees before this review takes place. Our recommendation to the government and the Auditor General is that it should be status quo. And I think that you have made a really good point. And again, I think TICO needs to speak to the about this themselves. But from my perspective, that these fees are being pushed through because that they don't. So the consumer and the industry are not being looked at as far as what is the best interest. It really is how do we fund this regulator in the short term, even though we've been asking for a review and change for over 20 years.
The elephant in the room seems to always be the fund.
Yes.
And you have some very strong ideas about that.
Yeah, so I think that as far as the compensation fund, that again, it's pretty complex, but we really need to understand what does the fund cover and what are what I would call smoke and mirrors around the fund. And so what I mean by that is that TICO is the payer of the last resort. And certainly the Auditor General brought that up as well, that all of the fees that are going into the fund, are they necessary? Is the fund necessary? And from our perspective, the beneficiary of the fund is the travel consumer. And so if the government believes that there should be a consumer fund in 2023, even though that the fund is the payer of the last resort, in that insurance companies pay first, credit card companies are actually who pays back consumers more than anybody, that we just feel that it should be the beneficiary should be paying for the fund, which would be the travel consumer.
I agreed. But I mean, I think you're saying going forward into 2024, right? Because 23.
Oh yeah, going into 2024 should have been the case in 2023.
It should have been the case, yes.
But moving forward, our position has been very clear.
Yeah, no question. And it would certainly streamline the funding of the fund, if you will, across provinces, so that we're not looking at different systems in each province. And then hopefully we could include Manitoba, Alberta, and the Maritime Atlantic provinces under the same umbrella. I realize that it's provincial, not federal, but it just seems to me that to have completely different systems and processes, depending on where the retailer is located, is kind of crazy town. So it makes us as an industry,
especially in 2024,
right?
And for the last decade, really, where that there are no real set borders when it comes to booking travel.
Exactly.
So someone in Brantford, Ontario, can book really directly with a tour operator or an airline, which was very different back in the 80s, or they are booking outside of the province. So I think it's that, again, there needs to be modernization. And
it really does. Hello. Yeah. Things have changed. So, a lot.
The other thing that I want to mention is that as far as a consumer contribution to the compensation fund, we've always also advocated that the anything when it comes to a regulator and the registrants, so tour operators and travel agencies, for instance, that it needs to be risk-based. So as we've said over and over again, some of our members who are paying the highest TICO fees, tens of thousands of dollars each year, would be deemed the least risky registrant. And so again, we've asked for over 2 decades for a risk model. Now, in our consultations with TICO and with the ministry, that I think that there's some agreement to look at that. And but our feedback to them is that when we've been talking about this for 20 years, every time a report comes out, there is the suggestion that it should be risk-based. And so our question is, 20 years later, why does TICO and the Ontario government not know the risk? They must. And so we just feel it is a delay tactic after delay tactic. And so we're finding that very, very frustrating. And then for most of our members, it's very much, do we even need the compensation fund in 2024, looking how consumers pay?
Right. Wendy, you are a fount of knowledge. I could keep picking your brain for much longer, but I want to get this out into the news. Thank you so much for taking the time to update us.
Thank you very much, Nina. Have a great day.